Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian. Very good to see you again. We are going to be exploring Latter-day Saint Church history through the lens of the Joseph Smith papers here. And I wanted to bring up this book. This was the very first one that I got. Again, I may have shown you this before, but my mom even put some notes in here because it was a present. This is Revelation book. This is the facsimile edition, the very first of the Revelation series. And you have seen it all. I almost forgot to mention, as of section 106, this book is done, which means we have gone through the entirety of Revelation books 1 and 2. So you've seen it all. I almost forgot to mention that. Today, what we're going to be doing is moving on to sections 111 to 114, which involves, unfortunately, some kind of nasty stuff that happens in 1836, in 1837, and in 1838. We get a lot of dissent. We get Joseph getting into arguments, being accused of some things that hold to this day. There's a lot of things that happen in this time. It's a very tough time in the history of the church. So I wanted to tip my hat to the Revelation books, and now we're going to dive into some gristy stuff. When we last left our heroes, we were just starting on section 111, so we are in 1836. The earliest copy of this that we get is in W.W. Phelps's diary, and it is in the handwriting of William W. Phelps, and it's a very clean copy. We also get a version of this section in the Book of the Law of the Lord, and the handwriting in this thing, as I think I've said it before, is gorgeous, and it is Robert B. Thompson's penmanship. We also get a copy in Erastus Snow's journal in his own hand, and we get some other histories that were collected mostly after Joseph Smith's death. And so, circumstantial introductions to this, the earliest copy that we get gives us this as an introduction. It says, a revelation, Salem, Massachusetts, August 6th, 1836. The Book of the Law of the Lord gives the same thing. Erastus Snow does what I would have done, say that it was in Kirtland just out of habit. So he says Kirtland, Ohio. He strikes that out and just says, a revelation given August 6th, 1836 in Salem, Massachusetts. I would have made the same mistake. Oh yeah, everything happens in Kirtland. But not this time. The current section headings that we have from our current Doctrine and Covenants, so this is 1981, 2013, totally the same. We're just not referencing History of the Church, which now we are in History of the Church, Volume 2. The historical introduction from the Joseph Smith papers gives us this. This is where we're coming up to. On the 25th of July, 1836, after writing 2 letters concerning church members in Missouri, Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Oliver Cowdery, and Sidney Rigdon left Kirtland, Ohio, to travel to the eastern United States, briefly visiting New York City and Boston, and staying in Salem, Massachusetts, before returning to Kirtland in mid-September. Salem, which was officially incorporated as a city in May 1836, which is crazy because of the Salem witch trials, but anyway, was described by Oliver Cowdery as a, quote, pleasantly situated town with 15,000 inhabitants, unquote. Located on Massachusetts Bay, about 15 miles north of the larger city of Boston. Salem's busy port held a prominent place in the domestic and international commercial shipping trade of the United States. Joseph Smith and his 3 companions arrived in Salem on the 5th of August and rented a house on Union Street for 3 weeks. The house may have been where Joseph Smith dictated this revelation a day later. So a footnote for this introduction says, this was Joseph Smith's second trip to Salem. He had first visited the city as a young boy with his uncle Jesse Smith while recovering from leg surgery to remove diseased bone. So if you recall, we talked about this in an earlier setting. This is a very famous story about how Joseph had to get some diseased bone extracted from him while he was fully conscious. He just wanted to hold his father, and that would be okay. Now, at the time, and this held for a long time, is that if he could get to a better climate or something like that, he would go to his Uncle Jesse's house. And if you remember from a previous episode, he actually wrote a letter to his Uncle Jesse that eventually convinced his uncle to join the church. So this, to me, is a very interesting circle being completed for the life of Joseph Smith. Not a lot is officially known about why they were there, so we get this from the historical introduction. No known contemporary documents specify church leaders' reasons for visiting the eastern United States, and a few records discuss this trip. The main contemporary sources of information are two letters written by Oliver Cowdery to his brother Warren A. Cowdery, which were published in the church's newspaper, and a letter Joseph Smith wrote to his wife, Emma, while in Salem. Oliver Cowdery's letters indicate that their time in New England was spent preaching and occasionally visiting historic places. The four church leaders were likely motivated by a concern about Zion and the financial situation of the church, particularly a need to reduce debts of church leaders. So there were two reasons, as per the usual, for this mission. So we get this. Joseph Smith and his colleagues may have raised money as they preached during their trip east in 1836, as it was not uncommon for missionaries to have the dual objectives of proselytizing and collecting funds for the church. This 6th of August revelation addresses the church's leaders' financial concerns. It informed the men that they would have the power to pay their debts and instructed them to, quote, concern not yourselves about Zion, for there were people and money in Salem for the benefit of Zion. Now, what we get from this is that this is some sort of a treasure-seeking endeavor. So people might be making some of that stuff up, so I will just share with you what the Joseph Smith Papers editors have shared. Related to the Revelation statement that there was much treasure in Salem, two later accounts from individuals not directly involved in the journey state that Joseph Smith traveled to the eastern United States to search for treasure or hidden money. In an 1843 pamphlet, 16-year-old dissident James C. Brewster briefly mentioned treasure hunting in relation to Joseph Smith's 1836 trip. Ebenezer Robinson wrote an account in 1889, 53 years after Joseph Smith's trip, that also linked the 1836 trip and searching for treasure. In fact, he claimed that the single objective of the trip was to look for hidden money in Salem. Robinson printed his account as the editor of The Return, a publication for David Whitmer's Church of Christ. Robinson, who joined the Church of the Latter-day Saints in 1836 while working in the Kirtland printing office, stated in his reminiscence that Don Carlos Smith, who worked with him, told him that Joseph Smith had learned about possible treasure from a brother in the church by the name of Burgess, who had come to Kirtland and stated that a large amount of money had been secreted in the cellar of a certain house in Salem, Massachusetts, which had belonged to a widow, and he thought he was the only person now living who had knowledge of it, or the location of the house. Robinson claimed he was also told that Burgess met Joseph Smith in Salem, but that Burgess was unable to identify the house after so many years and left. Continuing their search, according to Robinson, Joseph Smith and three other men found and rented a house they thought contained the hidden money, but they were unsuccessful in finding it. So there's a lot of stuff here that's like people weren't even there, or if they were there, or maybe they were around somebody who was there, it was like many years later. Anyway, so we get a footnote for this introduction. As a young man in Kirtland in 1837, Brewster claimed to have visions of ancient scriptures, and he and his small group of followers were disfellowshipped. He published his extra scriptural book of Esdras in 1842, which was the subject of a notice written by editor John Taylor in the December 1842 issue of the Times and Seasons. Responding to Taylor's description of treasure hunting as a ridiculous and pernicious practice, Brewster wrote, quote, "I would ask him who was the author of this practice among the Mormons. If he has a good memory, he will remember the house that was rented in the city of Boston with the expectation of finding a large sum of money buried in or near the cellar," unquote. Okay, little fighting words there. So we're hunting for treasure. It says this: it is possible that Joseph Smith had been told about hidden money in Salem and decided to pursue it to aid the church and relieve the financial and temporal pressure weighing down the branches in Kirtland and Missouri. And two contemporary documents may provide support for the statements of Brewster and Robinson. First, a promissory note was made out to a Jonathan Burgess in Salem, a tentative connection to the Burgess of Robinson's account. Second, Joseph Smith mentioned looking for a specific house in Salem in his 19 of August letter to Emma Smith. Robinson's account stated that Joseph Smith rented the house and failed to find any treasure, but Joseph Smith's letter to Emma reveals that he had not been able to rent or gain access to the house. While Joseph Smith seemed hopeful the situation would change, The men left Salem only a few days later and offered no indication that they had rented or even visited the sought-after house, nor is there any evidence that they later returned. Um, so it's kind of an iffy one, and this is in the section heading of this. So it's kind of a funny story that there's really not a lot of solid evidence behind the story regarding treasure seeking. So we get this. This revelation was not published in Joseph Smith's lifetime. It first appeared in print in the 1850s with the printing of the History of Joseph Smith in the Deseret News and the Millennial Star. It was first included in the Doctrine and Covenants in the 1876 edition, and the canonized version follows the text of the Phelps inscription that is featured here that we will be reading from. So a lot to do with this, but yeah, treasure seeking rears its head once again. I'm shocked to hear that the Painesville Telegraph was nowhere to be found here. But yeah, that's kind of why we're here in Salem, Massachusetts. So let's talk about some content and footnotes. We get this. The beginning of the Revelation says this. I, the Lord your God, am not displeased with your coming this journey, notwithstanding your follies. I have much treasure in this city for you, for the benefit of Zion, and many people in this city whom I will gather out in due time for the benefit of Zion, through your instrumentality. Therefore it is expedient that you should form acquaintance with men in this city, as you shall be led, and as it shall be given you. So footnote 2 for this says, one way Joseph Smith and his companions may have tried to accomplish this directive to make acquaintances in the Salem-Boston area was by holding meetings. Their most publicized meeting in Salem was held at the Lyceum Hall on the 20th of August, where Rigdon spoke on Christianity. The Essex Register described Rigdon favorably as, quote, a man of very respectable appearance and very fluent in his language, unquote. Several Salem and Boston newspapers mentioned the meeting. The men also held several meetings in Boston after leaving Salem. Now, there's a strange passage that I see here, and it says this. It says, it shall come to pass in due time that I will give this city unto your hands, that you shall have power over it, insomuch that they shall not discover your secret parts, and its wealth, pertaining to gold and silver, shall be yours. Footnote 3 for this says, a blessing given to Hiram Smith by Joseph Smith on the 18th of December, 1833, stated, quote, he shall be hid by the hand of the Lord, that none of his secret parts shall be discovered unto his hurt, unquote. So I guess pertaining to, like, we all make mistakes, and those are not going to be sent out in the open or something, but it's a very strange passage. The final words that we get from this revelation are, it's not a very long revelation, it says, tarry in this place and in the regions round about, and the place where it is my will that you should tarry, for the main shall be signalized unto you by the peace and power of my spirit, that shall flow unto you. This place you may obtain by hire, etc., and inquire diligently concerning the more ancient inhabitants and founders of this city. For there are more treasures than one for you in this city. Therefore be ye as wise as serpents, and yet without sin, and I will order all things for your good as fast as ye are able to receive them. Amen. Footnote 6 for this says, Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Oliver Cowdery, and Sidney Rigdon visited museums and historic sites in Salem and Boston. On the day that Joseph Smith dictated the revelation, Rigdon and Cowdery toured the East India Marine Society Museum and signed the guest register. How on earth do you go find a guest register? Anyway, whatever. Joseph Smith visited the same museum on the 9th of August. Cowdery and possibly the other men also visited places in Salem related to the 17th century witchcraft trials. They also visited the Boston Naval Yard, Bunker Hill, and the ruins of the Charlestown Ursuline Convent, which had been destroyed by a mob in 1834. So there you go. Section 1114. Some guy somewhere found some book with Joseph Smith's signature in it. My goodness, like, talk about the most random thing to find. These Joseph Smith papers, people, are for real. Anyway, let's go through some more history here. So we're going to fill in some stuff. After this revelation, we get licenses galore and various members doing various things. I'll use Edison Barney as an example just to kind of show you what this is, but seriously, rinse and repeat this in the Kirtland Elders Certificates book. And very much thanks to Thomas Burdick for writing a zillion of these things. I mean, there are so many of them. We then get a letter to Joseph Smith, which is in Joseph Smith's hands. So let's read it. This is from Salem, Massachusetts. We've already talked about it. August 19, 1836. It says this: My beloved wife, Brother Hiram is about to start for home before the rest of us. A little redundant there. Which seems wisdom in God, as our business here cannot be determined as soon as we could wish to have it. I thought a line from me by him would not be acceptable to you, even if it did contain but little, that you may know that you and the children are much on my mind. With regard to that great object of our mission, you will be anxious to know we have found the house since Brother Burgess left us, very luckily and providentially, as we had one spell been most discouraged. But the house is occupied, and it will require much care and patience to rent or buy it. We think we shall be able to effect it, if not now, within the course of a few months. We think we shall be at home about the middle of September. I can think of many things concerning our business, but can only pray that you may have wisdom to manage the concerns that involve on you, and want you should believe me that I am your sincere friend and husband, in haste, yours, etc. Joseph Smith Jr. Footnote 3 for this says, he doesn't really get into the nitty-gritties, but it says this: Joseph Smith's reluctance to discuss the business concerns on his mind mirrors his decision in an earlier letter to Emma, in which he wrote that he felt it was not prudent to write on such matters. In that letter, he told her, quote, I omit all the important things which I see you and I could make you acquainted with, unquote. He'd rather just say it in person. Makes sense. All right, after this letter, we get a host of licenses. We get a ton of land deals. We get promissory notes all over the place. We get the largest land purchase that Joseph Smith has ever been involved with in Ohio, and that is the Peter French Farm, which they officially purchased on the 15th of October, 1836. So you see that all over in the scriptures. The Kirtland Temple is situated on a part of that original Peter French Farm. We get even more licenses. We get deeds. And then we get something called the Constitution of the Kirtland Safety Society Bank. This is on the 2nd of November. And this institution eventually failed after becoming what's called an anti-banking institution because it couldn't get a charter. But I found this interesting. Only one institution made it through the system in Ohio due to the makeup of the legislature in the 1836 and 1837. So there was a lot of banks that actually wanted to become charters, and they weren't issuing anything to anybody. There was this idea that everything needs to be hard cash, or what they used to call specie. And that sort of faction of people were just overrunning Ohio legislatures, and so nobody got through. So it wasn't just the church. And a lot of people predicted that the Kirtland Safety Society would fail, and it did. And that caused major rifts, and we're going to get into a few of those through this whole thing. So instead of being a bank, which means you need a charter, they just became an anti-banking institution. But the problem is that Oliver Cowdery already went to Pittsburgh and got some plates, and they went to New York and got some materials. And the plates they used to print their own promissory notes, or, we would call them today Federal Reserve notes, but we'll get into that in a second. Anyway, so we get a lot more licenses. We get deeds. We get, and so we get a lot of this stuff. We get something called an indenture, which is very interesting. This is a way for a younger person to become an apprentice and learn the craft at the hands of somebody else in their town. So it does imply that they're not really getting paid. That's why it's called an indenture. So if you're an indentured servant, you're not necessarily getting paid. But in this case, they were using it to train, which is interesting. We get a meeting on the 22nd of December. It's published in the Messenger and Advocate. And it resolves unanimously to stop the practice of dumping the care of your poor onto Kirtland. Local congregations cannot just send off members that are having hard times to Kirtland for them to take care of the whole thing. You need to do this locally. And they resolved to stop sending people without proper preparations first so that things could be done in order. And this is one of the major reasons why the church was suffering so much financially, in Kirtland, I should say. And the very last thing we get in 1836 is a license for Daniel Carter. And this one is kind of fun. It's held in the archives of the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers. It is signed by Frederick G. Williams and Joseph Smith. So that is all that we have for part one. So if you stick with us, we're going to be getting into a little bit more of 1837, and we'll get into section 112. So stick with us.